All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started this morning. Thank you everyone for logging in. I hope this doesn't take away from your lunch, and I'm sorry if it does. Let me know if I might keep it at noon if it works for you, but let me know if it doesn't, because I could switch it back to the 10 o'clock hour. I just think that 10 o'clock hours tend to be on Monday mornings really tough in the clinical laboratory. So let me know what works better for you. This morning, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our DHHS partners, and I see a few on. Go ahead and introduce yourselves. Robin, if you want to start.
Robin Williams, Influenza Surveillance Coordinator, DHHS.
Brianna?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi. Hi, I'm Brianna Locke. I'm with DHHS, and I'm one of the enteric disease EPIs.
Yeah. And Jeff, you're on?
Hello, Jeff Hammock from DHHS, and I am the vector-borne disease EPI here.
Yeah, good to have you.
I don't know.
John, do you want to
she hasn't been here today.
Because she really needs to look at this.
Yep, John Filiameni here, also at DHHS, I guess liaising between the state and the public health lab.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad you heard me there. And let's see who else we have today. Well, we have our NPHL partners. Emily is on. Emily, introduce yourself.
Emily McCutcheon, Assistant Manager of the Biology Section at NPHL.
Yeah, anybody else sitting in on the call too of our staff? And Pete, are you on? All right. Well, thank you. I have 50 participants this morning. I think that's great, and appreciate you being on. Is there any new staff that we need to introduce? I think we had quite a few earlier. John, if you're there, is Rachel with you?
No, unfortunately not right now. Rachel is not in the room with me, but for those of you that haven't heard, we have a CDC embed for the laboratory surge staffing. Rachel Collier, recent grad out of, I believe, UC Davis, but she'll be here helping out with the testing going through NPHL.
Awesome, thank you. We'll get her on the meeting sometime. And with that, Robin, I'll get started with the influenza surveillance program. Again, I think for maybe some of the guests that have not been on for the last couple of weeks, but since it's so busy, would you like to do the honors of just explaining the program again?
Yes, for influenza, we do have a set number of influenza sentinel providers, and then we have a sentinel laboratory in each local health department jurisdiction. And we send these facilities 10 specimen collection kits or respiratory collection kits for influenza, and ask those facilities to send those specimens back in to NPHL. And these specimens are tested for flu, they're typed, and then they are sent off for strain typing and for antiviral resistance testing at the Wisconsin, at the CDC laboratory, and it's for CDC surveillance, so they can try to describe activity here and also the antiviral resistance going on. So,
sounds like somebody put us on hold already. I haven't made that announcement not to put us on hold. See if I can find them. All right. Yeah, go ahead, Robin. Just as a
Okay.
reminder to everybody, not put your phone on hold if you're on your phone. Go ahead.
Okay, so that's the regular, typical influenza surveillance. During the beginning and the end of the surveillance season, we are interested in any laboratory having them send in any positive flu specimens to the public health lab for confirmation. I know a lot of people aren't testing for flu, but during this COVID time, I really encourage people and providers to look at the clinical illness, which I know is sometimes it is difficult to differentiate between COVID and flu, but it will be coming up, so we definitely need to be thinking about flu testing and RSV testing as well. So for those that don't have the specimen collection kits, viral specimens put in viral transport media, and Emily and Karen can talk a little bit more about that. But since most of you are familiar with using Newlert, it would be preferred if you ordered the specimen test in Newlert if you are sending the specimen in. There is a specific place to order flu testing, so you could do that. And then we do ask that you fill out some epidemiology questions on those specimens, like if you did a rapid test and what kind and what was the results of that test. If they were on an antiviral, that might have some, usually they're not, unless they're hospitalized patients, was possibly they could. If they had a flu vaccine, that also sometimes could, if it was, you know, the nasal, sometimes that could show up as a positive flu, but not many people are getting those anymore, but it's still a possibility. So there's some different questions that we'd like you to answer: travel, animal exposure, things like that on those flu specimens, especially at the beginning and the end of the season when we aren't seeing very much, so we can try to figure out where it's coming from. And if you don't want to use Newlert, which I highly don't recommend you not use Newlert, really would like you to use Newlert because that is the easiest way for you to get results back, and for them to be submitted with less issues, since regional and the public health lab are getting so many specimens. It's really best to use Newlert. There is a paper requisition, but that's only going to be given to you upon request. So, going to make you work for it. If Karen and Emily want to talk a little bit about those who don't have specimen collection kits, the best specimen to get and how to send those.
Emily, you want to chime in?
Sure. We are going to be requesting a nasopharyngeal swab for this assay that is going to be stored in viral transport media. It's going to have to be your standard flock swab that is being used in most instances for COVID, but it does, like I said, need to be in that viral transport media. A lot of the people out there, the smaller clinics testing are running an antigen, which is not always done with this specimen source. So an alternate specimen may need to be collected to confirm. Robin, I'm not sure how you provide guidance on that one, but it should be supplies that you have in-house already for COVID testing. And if it's not, please let us know and we can work with you to get a specimen collection kit or a handful of them sent to you.
Yes. And I would just like to throw in the comment about shipment. Once the specimen's collected and you need to ship, do remember that we are, shall I say, being watched by the DOT in that they want to make sure both are COVID and that influenza is essentially the same thing, that they are being triple packaged and labeled as a category B. So for the Sentinel providers who we have provided kits, I'm not sure if you have boxes. I don't know if we necessarily sent boxes, but if you don't already have boxes, we definitely will send you them so you can comply with that regulation. And thank you for talking, Robin, about the paper influenza requisition, because we've had some questions about it. And I only had one other question for you. It's on the surveillance specimens being tracked this year. Are we going to try to make sure that all of our providers, Sentinel providers, get those in on a timely basis, making sure that they provide their first 3 at the beginning of the season and so forth?
We're going to try. We send out weekly reminders to the Sentinel providers. Laboratories, hospital laboratories would like you to, you know, the issue is there's really not very many hospitalized flu patients right now. So you can, you know, if a provider is thinking that it's looking more flu-ish than COVID-ish, we would do a strain type, but again, it should be COVID negative. So if you do a test at your facility, you can do send it in if it's COVID negative. We will have to confirm that because if you have just antigen test, but if it's PCR, I don't know if we have to confirm the COVID, but we'll have to test the flu no matter what. So just keep that under consideration. As for reporting, all COVID and positive and negative COVID results and tests are reportable. So they should all be sent to the state health department, preferably in a spreadsheet, the CSV spreadsheet. And then we can just upload it and get you signed up to upload it yourself in a spreadsheet format. So rather than demonstrate every single COVID test, because that is very time consuming. So if there's a way that you could just download what you have in your system and get it uploaded to our system, that would be the best. I'm reporting these COVID positive and negatives. Flus is reportable the same old way. Only positive and negative flu have to be reported from hospital laboratories via either ELR or via the weekly flu survey. Clinics do not have to report their influenza positives or negatives. Only those reporting electronically must report the individual cases, and then hospital laboratories must fill out the weekly flu lab survey that we've done for many, many years. And if you don't want to do that and want to get onboarded to ELR, we'll keep working to get everybody onboarded as much as possible. So, so you don't have to do that weekly survey.
All right.
But we don't want every single flu test coming in like COVID. Flu looks at activity. We're not going to count every single case of influenza.
Okay. Any questions for Robin? I don't see any questions for you in the chat.
This is Emily. I just want to bring up a quick comment about the influenza surveillance program. Based on this year's current pandemic, and in order to keep all laboratories staff as safe as possible, the CDC has requested that any specimens that we submit to them for whole genome sequencing have a negative COVID test. Robin hinted at this. They will not accept an antigen. So if we do not have evidence of a negative PCR test being done by your submitting facility, we will have to test that specimen before it being sent to the CDC. Now, I do want to add the caveat that every single influenza specimen we receive in does not get sent to the CDC. We work with them on certain guidelines that we have to follow, and we try to send a good geographic and age range of what we're seeing occurring across our state for it to meet the requirements to go to the CDC. But if for some reason you submit a specimen for influenza surveillance and then hear through the grapevine somehow that this actually came back COVID positive or COVID negative, that is the reasoning for that. It could be that the specimen you submitted as part of influenza surveillance was chosen to be sent to the CDC, and we had to perform the COVID PCR on it to ensure it was negative before being transferred on.
And also for flu surveillance, this must be symptomatic patients. We will not do any sort of screening for influenza. It has to meet the influenza clinical definition: fever, cough, sore throat, looks like the flu. So please, only symptomatic cases.
Robin, did we answer the question about the non-Sentinel clients? If they are not in that program, what do they send in? Do they, you probably said it before and maybe I missed it.
Yeah, Emily went over that.
Yeah.
The VTM.
Just send in your positives for confirmation. Correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Any questions from the audience? All right, we'll go on. Thank you to Emily and Robin to outline our influenza program. Let's go on next to the outbreaks that we have seen in Nebraska. The one I know about, although I'm not sure this is Nebraska. Well, let's let Brianna, if you would, speak on listeria.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. So currently there's no listeria outbreaks in Nebraska at this time. There are some multi-state listeria outbreaks happening, such as deli meats and some mushrooms, but at this time we do not have any Nebraska cases that are a part of this outbreak. So far this year in 2020, we've had 2 listeria cases reported, actually both kind of recent. The first one was in the middle of October, and unfortunately it was a one day old baby. The mom delivered the baby and then it was positive for listeria. In the interview, mom reported consuming deli cheese, deli meat, sushi, fresh produce, dried meat. So kind of all the things that you really shouldn't be eating when you're pregnant. But I believe the baby's okay now. Unfortunately, that specimen did not get sent to the public health lab, so we will not be able to have whole genome sequencing results on that one. But and the second case that we had just as of last week was a 31-year-old, a young man. He was hospitalized. He did have some underlying health conditions, and he reported several restaurant exposures, such as in addition to deli meats and cheeses and a lot of fresh produce. So that one did get sent to the public health lab, so we should expect some sequencing results soon on that one. But yeah, like I said, our 2 cases are not linked to any outbreaks at this time. So just wanted to make that clear.
No, I'm glad you did. With that, I guess we did want to remind all our laboratories that if you do see a listeria, please, please, please do send that in to us. And with that, I thought I would just bring, I'm going to bring up our chart, if I can get it up here. Are you seeing in your screen the quick guide now for independent methods?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and actually, to be honest with you, for those laboratories that do have a microbiology section, we have a quick guide as well for anything that you might isolate in the laboratory and what needs to be sent to the NPHL. So you'll see that Listeria is listed on here, as well as quite a number of things. If you do not have these charts like posted on your stools bench or your area where you do your biofires, please do so, because the independent methods will tell you what you have on your biofire that you would not need to isolate. And if you're not a laboratory that has that capability, then sending it either to your reference laboratory or send directly to us, we would appreciate that, so we can go ahead and try to recover. The reason we recommend that you do it or your reference laboratory is because it seems like we lose something in transport and don't recover near as much as we should. So please, if you have the ability to culture, please do it and make sure you get that organism sent to NPHL. All right. With that, I'm going to move that out of the way. And would you, Brianna, also do me a huge favor if you want to talk about our other norovirus program? Or
Yeah,
Emily.
actually, yeah, Sadie or Emily, they can talk more about that one.
Okay.
Hey, Sadie's on. I'm the other enteric epi in the program, and I'll talk a little bit more about NERVS. It looks like there's one too many letters and they're kind of out of order. So NERVS stands for National Respiratory and Enteric Virus Surveillance System. And we've been participating in NERVS for flu surveillance already, but this past year, Nebraska was awarded funding for norovirus surveillance. So wanted to start talking about recruiting some labs to participate in this program. We're asking labs to do two things. The first one is get aggregate total numbers of the number of tests ran each week with the total number of norovirus tests positive. I'm going to shelf this for right now. We're working on a way to automate that so we can get automated reports with labs using the BioFire multiplex PCR system. The second thing we're asking is to obtain sporadic positive norovirus specimens to our public health lab. So we're asking labs to submit approximately 10 specimens a year. And Karen, I didn't know if we should talk about the test order. You can order in NEWLR or the NPHL test request form. Are we still doing the NV spore test order?
Emily might know that.
It is part of the NV spore test order, but I want to just remind laboratories that we will be reaching out to you for onboarding for this program. As Sadie has kind of hinted at, we have a way to make this significantly easier for everyone. And what we don't want to see is, you know, a whole bunch of submission of sporadic norovirus specimens without actually getting a full overview of the NERVS program, because we do have to have that information paired with some other data, which we are working on the quick, seamless, and easy electronic transfer of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we know everything. It's a busy time for everyone with COVID. We just kind of want to put feelers out. So if you are interested in this program, please send Karen an email or myself. I can put my email in the chat box if that works.
And how do you spell it one more time so I can get it right?
Oh, NERVS, NREVSS, National Respiratory and Enteric Virus Surveillance System. I know everything's an acronym, right?
Yep, for sure. All right. Well, we'll get it right sometime here. Oh, it's Monday. All right. Thank you, you guys. I sure appreciate it. I want to go on real quickly and talk a little bit about point of care, because, again, this is still the biggest type of testing in our community. We continue to put this type of testing into our long-term cares, our nursing homes, And I myself had to sit down and really think about what is PCR and what, you know, what these other antigen methodologies are. So if I can bring my little chart here. Well, no, let's go on, and I think I have too much open here. If I can find it, here we go. Do you now see something that's called the COVID testing platform comparisons? Is that available on your screen?
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So yes, a number of the tests that we talk about in the field, the Cepheid, the Abbott ID Now, which is different than the other Abbott Binex Now. So in keeping these all straight, even for myself, I put it on a chart. So these are the Cepheids and the Abbott Binex Nows are truly PCRs. And we're going to talk a little bit about if you need to confirm these particular viruses and when to confirm them. Typically, because these two are PCRs, there is no need to send them into NPHL, but the other antigen type tests, the Quidels, the BD Veritor system, and the Abbott Binex Nows, they do need confirmation. And again, like I said, we'll talk a little bit more about that. So there is some information out on the web about that the FDA has issued an alert to say that there is potential false positive results with antigen tests, as we all know. And if you want to look that up, I've got the link right there. I think we all know that. It's just a matter of making sure that your nursing homes and your long-term cares are doing it correctly too. So if you work with them or support them in any way, please make sure that they're fully aware of the confirmation methods. So I am actually going to try a new thing, a poll. And if you bring up your ribbon at the bottom, well, maybe not. It's if I bring up the ribbon at the bottom, I'll bring up a poll. I'm going to launch this poll, and I want, if you see it, hopefully you do, the question should be, does your lab confirm if you're not working with state-supported testing, like if we've not sent you any product or supplies, or if you're not sending it to NPHL for testing. If you're doing PCR though, are you sending these specimens in for confirmation if you get a positive on a negative patient, or if you get a negative on a highly suspect patient? This is strictly anonymous. All I'm getting is percentages, but and I hope that question makes sense. But I wanted to make sure that if you are doing just those antigen tests, point of cares, are you getting them confirmed? So maybe we need to talk about it just a little and make it clear as to when to confirm and when you don't need to confirm. It looks like a majority of you are not confirming at this point. So thank you. Thank you for filling out that poll. And here's those results. Essentially, a majority, 84% of you are not confirming those point of cares. All right. So maybe that would bring in Emily or Pete. And Emily, I don't know if Pete's on right now.
I'm here, Karen. But,
Okay. Would you take a moment and before we go into our own status, would you like to talk a little bit more about the confirmation of positives?
so you're talking about antigen tests.
Yes.
Yeah. The state is looking at trying to develop a program that would help the facilities using antigen tests be able to recognize when confirmation testing is needed for their results. And I believe that is still in its infancy. I don't think that program has been clearly put into place. Emily, have you heard any more from the state about trying to get the software in place for that?
Are you speaking specifically for the Binax now or any?
Yes, yes.
The software is in place and they're rolling it out to a couple pilot labs to ensure that all of it functions appropriately and that it meets all transfer requirements, et cetera. And then once it all looks good, it'll be rolled out further.
Okay, so it's still being rolled out. There's still the question about the other antigen tests, the BD Veritor and the Quidel Sophia for confirmation testing as well. And I do not believe that there's a program in place to recognize those as well. Is that correct?
At this time, that's
For
correct.
confirmation testing.
Yeah, at this time, that's correct.
Yeah. So there's a lot of questions that are unknown here. I think the key is, however, is that these point of care tests do put out results that are inaccurate at times. And we all need to recognize the fact that whether you use these in your lab or not, you probably have other clients that may be using your facility that could be using these tests. And that confirmation testing is something that needs to be considered.
Hey, Peter and Karen, Dr. Safranik, I'll just throw in a couple of comments too. You know, the concern again, and I think what Dr. Matt Donahue was trying to do, working with Nick's staff and a programmer, is to say, is it possible for us to ask certain kind of questions at the time one of these rapid point of care tests is being done that kind of gets at the clinical profile of the patient in the epidemiologic context in which that patient exists, so that then you could almost like have some artificial intelligence to help figure out if you need to do a confirmatory test because you know, the result you know, just doesn't seem reliable. And it's attempting, I think, to kind of automate Bayes' theorem or Bayes' hypothesis, talking about the need to interpret a laboratory test in the context of the clinical symptoms of the patient in the epidemiologic context in which that patient exists. So patient is really symptomatic and is in a environment where there's a lot of COVID around, say a household or a long-term care facility, and yet you get a negative test. Hopefully this little computer algorithm is going to kind of dummy proof and kind of do the thinking for the person saying, wow, I got a negative test. I got to get a confirmatory, and I got to continue to keep that person in isolation because it just seems like the rapid test is not consistent with the epidemiologic and clinical context. I don't know that it's ever been done before, but it's a little bit of an experiment. You know, ideally what you need is a well-trained person, a healthcare provider who understands Bayes' theorem and knows how to manage patients and interpret lab tests. So.
Yeah, same would be true, Dr. Safranik, if you get a positive result on an asymptomatic person who has no risk factors, no exposure risk, that then would be considered a possible false positive as well.
And that's what we were seeing with the BD Veritor, that test seemed to skew towards a lot of false positives. Maybe half of all the positives that were performed were false positives when you try to confirm it on a PCR. So each one of these tests has maybe a little bit of an Achilles heel. The Abbott Binax Now, which we're trying to disseminate, that looks like maybe it's it doesn't pick up individuals with a really high CT value on the PCR and may be clinically irrelevant. Again, has to be interpreted in the epidemiologic clinical context, whether or not you need a confirmatory.
Yeah, and unfortunately, these tests are being used off-label on asymptomatic people too. So the companies are saying we're using them incorrectly, and we have to pay attention to that as well.
Absolutely.
Dr. Safranek, thank you for that input, and Pete, you as well. That whole topic, I think a lot of people have questions about, and I have to apologize. I know my earlier poll question was kind of all over the place, but what I was trying to, really get at is for those antigen tests, if you're considering any confirmation, and of course those guidelines, we really need to have them better defined, I think. So we look forward to those charts that might be coming out. I know some others have commented that their PCR is not on my list. If you have a PCR or an antigen test that's not on that list, please put it in the chat list, because I'd like to look into those methodologies anyway. So going on, we do have a question of why would you be testing an asymptomatic or no-risk patient? Says here that we only use the antigen test for symptomatic patients, and they must have a symptomology within 5 days. I think the answer to that question, if either of you want to chime in, but I believe really what we're seeing is that some people are really given pressure to, or some laboratories given pressure to do surveillance testing, patients who are negative. And therefore they're asked to do that point of care testing. So
it's probably more true, Karen, from the standpoint that you have nursing homes and other facilities that have been given these tests through some government programs and been asked to run these as surveillance as well. And you have to recognize also that in a lot of these facilities, there are non-laboratorians running these tests. And the quality control, et cetera, is subjective to a lot of different things. So keep that in mind as well.
Right, exactly. Another question here is, will you be able to share that table of your COVID platform? Yeah, as soon as I can get it completed and have accurate information and such, I'd be more than happy to put on our website. Thank you for those of you who are sharing what instrumentation you're using. I'll make sure and add that to our chart. Another question is that someone validating PCR Solus 8 testing. We have not received FDA EUA yet, but is close to validating as a lab developed test. Is that PCR? Yeah, it is PCR. So that's good to know that we have it out there. And see if I have any other questions. So another question might be, currently not doing any rapid tests, but the doctors always like one. Listening to this, do I try to shear them away from rapid testing?
Karen, I can take that one.
Thank you.
Yes, this is Emily, guys. We are never going to tell you guys to not perform testing. Any COVID test is going to be better than no COVID test. You just have to take into account the sensitivities and specificities of these different assays that are available. As Dr. Safranek and Pete have mentioned, some of these rapid antigen tests each has their own little tweak or, thing that causes them to not be as comparable to a PCR assay. Some have a higher false positive, some have a higher false negative. you need to really do a lot of research on what you're wanting to implement if you're looking at a true rapid test, which would likely be those antigen tests that are 15 minutes or less. If you have the instrumentation and the availability, I would suggest looking at PCR method instead, especially if you can get your hands on a Cepheid gene expert. We actually run that assay here in-house as well, in addition to the CDC high throughput assay. It takes about 45 minutes to get a test result, but it is highly accurate and comparable to the PCR test that we are running in coordination with the CDC. So that would be my suggestion if you're looking for something on a more rapid. The downfall to that assay is that it is not high throughput. So it really, you need to find something that's going to meet your lab's needs, but still meet the sensitivity and specificity requirements out there.
The two other downfalls, Emily, to the Cepheid is the expensive instrumentation. I think we're talking around $40,000 for the instrument, and the lack of cartridges. They're very hard to come by.
Yes, thank you. We've had an interesting conversation on chat. If you haven't brought your chat up, Christy Nickel brought up a great point from Brian. She says that these antigen tests are very helpful in the ED, as long as you only use it for symptomatic and within 5 days of onset. Save your PCR test for your inpatients, and that's an excellent comment. Thank you, Christy.
I think that is great guidance, and that also shows the utility of those antigen tests when used under manufacturers' recommendations and not by the enforcement discretion of other entities, which suggest using them in asymptomatic populations.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions along the line of the PCR, or sorry, point of care? Another question.
Karen Thompson-Fronick, I'll throw out one other item.
Yeah.
Matt Donahue is in charge of allocating, I'm not sure I want to use the adjective massive inventory of Abbott Binax Now tests that we're promised to be getting from the federal government. And that's not a single dump. It's going to come in, in shipments and all. And we're looking for the best place to allocate those. Those are provided free. And so anyone who gets those and performs a test can't charge for the actual test. If there's a need to charge for specimen collection or something, that's something different. But the thought there is we're looking for places, number one, who have access to schools or could be a resource for testing of schools. So the closer you are, the provider or the lab that could help provide that service to schools, that's a real plus in terms of getting allocation. And the other huge thing, obviously, is if you could integrate that into your existing automated electronic lab reporting, so it would come through that way. And then, like I said, to not bill for the actual test itself. Anybody who was interested, though, Matt Donahue on our staff, he'd be a great person to contact. And it's not easy to find folks that are able to help us with both those criteria, but it'd be a great service, and we would be thrilled to partner with someone who could say yes to those questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Of course, a lot of comments that reagents and the plastics are extremely difficult right now to get with some of the PCRs. We know it's an issue everywhere, as Emily says, so we're all trying our best. I know that the Binax Now, some have expressed an interest of that. That is something we definitely can, like we said, pass along to Dr. Donahue. All right, and for sake of time, I think we'll go on and hit the NPHL status. Emily, if you'd take a moment to do that for us.
Sure. The big news out of NPHL right now is that we are in our final stages of bringing our CDC multiplex assay up and running in-house. This assay has been verified for a while, but we've been working on getting some reporting kinks untangled so that we can transfer these results to the state and to the CDC. This assay is going to allow for the dual detection of both SARS-CoV-2 and influenza and a single reaction. which will really provide us a lot of information on what's going around this respiratory season, as we all understand that this, is a scary couple of months we're going into. So just heads up to everyone, when you go to do your Mueller ordering, there will be a new test code associated with this. It is NCOV-FL. And it will replace our current test code, which is NCOV-SC. That will no longer be orderable. We will fully transition to this multiplex assay so that we can get the most information as possible from the specimens submitted. So just heads up, if you guys request a COVID-only assay in the upcoming weeks, you may get COVID and influenza back. And that is the reason we are fully transitioning to this new assay. Not only do we have a better supply chain for it, but it's more information, which is never a bad thing in this time.
Emily, again, what are the 3 primers? And then would this be, again, essentially, what's the capacity, I guess? That's what I'm looking for. What are the 3 primers and what's the capacity?
Sure, this assay is going to be able to differentiate between influenza type A, influenza type B, and SARS-CoV-2. And then because of the multiplex capabilities of this assay, with current staffing and days working, we can easily increase over 1,000 specimens a day, we feel. So it will allow us to further increase testing availability here at NPHL. Just so you know, we are also working on the Cepheid assay that is coming out, which is also a quadruplex. That assay will allow for detection of SARS-CoV-2, influenza A, influenza B, and RSV. But as I spoke earlier, that assay is limited in throughput.
Emil, if we were all gathered together in person, I'd ask everybody to give you a standing ovation.
Good job, Emily. Thank you. Any questions for Emily, Dr. Safranek, or Pete? Dr. Safranek, we see your note that, and thank you for putting that information and Dr. Donahue's contact information there on the chat. If no more questions, I thought I'd bring up real quickly, bring it across again here. Hopefully you can see some of the CDC guidelines that are just out recently. Pete, you just shared these this morning with us, so I thought I'd share it with our laboratories. The continued interim guidelines for collection, really what they have changed here is classification of and language on how to collect saliva. As we go down, it talks about saliva specimens being collected by the person being tested, either at home or at the testing site under supervision. So there's some new tests coming out that are looking at this methodology of collection. And let's see, I believe there was one other line. Thought it was a great image they had. And here is the instruction of how to collect. They want anywhere from 1 to 5 mils of saliva. That's a lot of saliva, isn't it? But definitely need to have it in a leak-proof container. All right, so I just thought bring that
Karen,
to your attention.
Yeah, Karen, I'd like to jump in on this.
Yeah.
So all submitting facilities throughout the state know this specimen source is not accepted by NPHL at this time. We're currently working with the laboratory to identify what potential loss in sensitivity will be seen by switching to this specimen source. Of course, we want to provide the most accurate data for our submitting facilities as possible. And while saliva sounds like a fantastic option for that and will greatly decrease the burden placed on those submitting facilities, we would like to look at what the sensitivity loss is on that. So we are performing a study to look into this. There is the potential that it will be available for NPHL in the future. That is under consideration and under study. But at this time, it is not an accepted specimen source for NPHL submission. I would also like to add that there are some EUAs out there that do have saliva as an acceptable specimen source, and not all of them are no preservative required. You have to follow guidance on the testing facility and the EUA outlined in that test to determine if preservatives are required, if there's a special submission tube, and what volume that is.
Right, right. And that's very true. So I'm glad you stressed that, Emily. Christy Nichols made the comment, it sounds like the dual Nair swab is so much easier. It's still easier. And with that, there is some new information out from from the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health, and they do itemize specifically how to do those Nairs. But remember that these kind of specimens still should be, well, there's some discussion about self-collection, if patients can do their own. We just need to make sure it's done properly. It says here that it has to be at least 1 centimeter inside the nose to get a good specimen, and that you should be rotating the swab and leaving it there for 10 to 15 seconds. And then on top of that, taking the same swab, placing it in the next Nair and doing the same thing. So getting a good specimen is also very important with the nasal swab, even though it is definitely much simpler. So, and this information was just recently released as well, and I will be happy to share it all with you. Any questions about those two? All right. Hearing none, some additional information.
I do have a question about the nasal anterior. If we validated our procedure just using a nasopharyngeal swab, you really just can't switch over without doing another validation, can you?
You'd need to follow your accrediting agency's guidelines on that. Many of them are going to require you to do a verification based on number of specimens as suggested by your laboratory director. But we cannot really tell you exactly how to do that. You would just have to follow your accrediting agency's guidelines for that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Other questions? All right, moving on. Just some reminders that LPX is out there. Do I have any LPX laboratories or laboratories working on the LPX currently? They are due by, Emily and I were looking at this, by Tuesday the 24th. I think we have some interesting ones. So we are unfortunately not able to use StatPack right now. Our StatPack is down, so you will not have to save those images to the StatPack. Therefore, if you could possibly go ahead and do the notification as you normally would, and that would be to notify NPHL. Hopefully you are familiar with how to do it that way. What it is really is just simply to call our 24/7 pager number, which I have listed right here below in number 4, agenda item number 4. I am going to hold a post LPX training or discussion. What we'll do is we may not have the CDC answers back yet, but we'd like to share after they've been handed in and it's closed out. We'll share our information with each other to see what we might have done right and what we might have gotten wrong. After that, after Thanksgiving, we will go ahead and then send out our state challenge set. Anybody that does not do the LPX will receive a state challenge set. We have 2 organisms this time that I will ask you to work up. For the laboratories that don't do much micro anymore, but still do gram stains, however, I have what's called the gram stain challenge, and we will be sending that out as well here after Thanksgiving or the 1st of December. So last but not least, just to let you know that I'm really excited about packaging and shipping for 2021. APHL has brought in a company called Safety Pack. You might recognize it by the fact that this is the company we buy our boxes from. And they do provide packaging and shipping training, and they will be giving it to us for free. So I think that we really need to gear up, look at your numbers in your laboratories, see how many can package. We really would like to have 2, if not 3, of your staff able to be certified in packaging and shipping. And also, if you have not certified within the last 2 years, or if it's been over 2 years, you will need to be recertified. So this is a great way to do it as well. We have other options for training those who are currently certified and just need to be recertified. CDC has a very nice new online system or online course that is available, and I think it's a good product as well. Not nearly as hard as the one that we've tried to do before. So, any other topics we need to bring up here? Emily did share a great pictorial from the CDC. See if I can bring that up. It's coming up.
Karen, while you're working on bringing that up, I just wanted to make a note with everyone about NPHL's 24/7 emergency pager. We have been notified that there have been some instances when people have paged that they did not receive a call back on. We think that this is due to some technical difficulties. We can track when pages are received through our paging system, and we aren't seeing them on our end. And our staff is very good about returning phone calls quickly, given the urgency of the use of the 24/7 emergency pager. So if for some reason you don't receive a phone call back within an hour from NPHL staff, please page again.
Yeah, that's a very good point. There are times where there's possibly just a digit missing from your phone number. For instance, if you type your phone number in as to what we should call you back on, one of those digits might be missing. So it's just technical error. If you don't hear back within, a quick time, really, feel free to literally call or page again, excuse me. So thank you, Emily, for that reminder. But yeah, here's that anterior nasal swab CDC has released. We think this is a really good resource to have if you are collecting or working in a facility that must collect. And I will take that down. Are there any other questions? Looking through the chat box just to make sure. Teresa says we're currently haven't been sending the COVID testing to NPHL. With the new testing available, if supplies become more limited, can we send COVID specimens to NPHL? Definitely, if it fits our criteria, and Emily, please step in, but as long as they fit the criteria of a symptomatic patient, close contact, and the source, yes, please do. Our capabilities have increased greatly. We certainly would be willing to do that.
Teresa, if you would like to reach out to Karen and I, we can get you in contact with the correct people to get you increased allocations of supplies, and we can actually start that before this next assay goes fully into swing.
Yeah, you do. Okay, so don't forget to sign in on the chat box. I'll leave the chat box up for a few minutes. And we appreciate everybody joining us today. We're past time, and have a great week.
Hey, Karen, before we sign off, I just wanted to extend my heartfelt thanks to the entire laboratory community, especially the MPHL folks, but everybody is really having to stress on this, and I just can't tell everybody how much we appreciate it, and just showing up on this call. I'm sure you're busy, and it was a sacrifice just to make the call here, so
Yeah.
I can't express that gratitude enough. I really appreciate it. I have never seen an outbreak where laboratory science played such a huge oversized role. It is just, I almost feel like it's half the game right now is getting good lab stuff going here, and so you guys are the heroes right now. I really want to thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Safranek. We appreciate that. So.
Thanks, Karen.
You bet.